learned from the small business and women-owned small business set-aside pools. We'll talk a little bit about timing and some common gotchas that came up that if you are bidding on the HUBZone or the service-disabled veteran-owned small business pool for Polaris, you may want to be aware of, just so that you don't run into the same headaches, especially at the last minute, because we know that this has been a drawn-out process and it's stressful enough. So we don't want to add to your plate with little gotchas. So we're going to try to keep you apprised of where those are, and also just give you a recap on kind of where the opportunities are at and how we think this is going to play out. So with that, like I said, we're going to be covering the latest updates for the opportunities, the specific lessons learned from small business and women-owned small business pools. The HUBZone and service-disabled veteran-owned small business pools are the two active pools right now. And then we'll just run through some frequently asked questions that come up again and again. So a little bit about Trident. We are a service-disabled veteran-owned small business that was founded in 2008. We're headquartered in San Diego, but we provide the full life cycle of business development support for government contractors. So whether you are looking to identify opportunities to bid on, if you want to build out your pipeline, make it a little bit more robust so that you've got opportunities that you're tracking, or if you need help with the actual proposal response and submission, we can provide all those services that scale to what your business needs. So we work with both large businesses and small businesses, primarily in the federal space, and we have a soft spot for DoD. When you see my background, it'll make a little bit more sense. So I am Rebecca Wayland. I'm a capture management SME at Trident. I'm also the human resources manager. I've got about 8 years of DoD specific proposal writing and proposal management experience. I'm a co-author of our Fast Prop process, which is an accelerated way to help you respond to proposals. We outline the things that you really need to do to keep your efforts on track. I'm Trident's GWAC lead, so that's why you'll see me on all these Polaris webinars. I'm also a market research and proposal expert with Trident. And prior to my proposal management life, I was a surface warfare officer in the Navy. So a lot of the team at Trident has a military background, and so that's one of the reasons that we kind of specialize in DoD proposals. But we've got a lot of industry experts on our team who have a wealth of knowledge across the government contracting landscape. So if you have a specific need, or if there's a specific agency that you are trying to respond to or break into, definitely give us a call. We'll get you in touch with one of our great resources and see if we can help you in that endeavor. So moving right along, kind of where we're at with these opportunities. So if you've been tracking this, you know that the small business and women-owned small business pools were finally submitted last week on the 7th of October. Everybody kind of took a deep breath. Not really surprising, there were some immediate protests filed. There had already been one filed for the small business pool ahead of the submission, but then there were 2 new protests filed, one for the small business pool, one for the woman-owned small business pool, on the same day that the proposals were due, and the decision on those is due in January of 2023. GSA is hoping to award the contracts for the small business and the women-owned small business pools by the end of the calendar year, but we'll see if they're able to hold to that timeline. And then, as I mentioned, that previous protest that went in before the proposal due date is still under review, and that decision is due in December. I don't have any more information about the nature of those protests, so we're kind of keeping an eye on that to see if there's going to be ripple effects. When it comes to the service-disabled veteran-owned small business pool and the HUBZone pools, so this RFP came out in September. It was released on the 15th, so this is live. Amendment 1 came out on the 30th of September, and that pretty much just corrected some administrative errors within the solicitation. It gave some updated information for vendors if they were having issues with their SAM registration, and then made a small tweak, really a clarification to the scorecard. So nothing big changed with that. I will say that the question due date was 5 October, and what they've done so far with the service-disabled veteran-owned small business pool and the HUBZone pools is release all of the Q&A from Polaris, which makes it a little bit cumbersome if you're trying to sort through all the questions that came before. But it's good reading. The question and answer document is available on sam.gov. It's about 52 pages, but it covers both questions with the solicitation as well as the Polaris Symphony portal. which, as you probably know, is the specific portal that you will need to upload your proposal in. So right now, the due date for those two pools is the 4th of November. Haven't seen any extensions yet, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. If you bid on the small business or the woman-owned small business pool, the good news is that all of the documentation that you uploaded for that is available for your subsequent proposal. You just need to reassociate the documents with that proposal submission. And then just, again, big picture, you probably already know this, but a little bit of motherhood and apple pie never hurt. If you are trying to bid on the surface disabled veteran-owned small business pool or the HUBZone pool, you must be one of those set-asides. Or if you're a joint venture, you must have that qualifying set-aside. And everybody on your team, all prime and teammates, have to be a small business in NICS code 541512. There's a lot of really good clarifying information in the Q&A about around this topic, but there's really not a way around it unless you're an SBA approved mentor protege. But then you're really going to want to read the fine print to make sure that your entity still qualifies. The minimum qualifying number of projects that you need to submit is 3, but if we're being honest, you are going to need to submit 5 projects in order to be competitive. Nobody has published a range, nobody official, right, has published a range of what they think the minimum qualifying score would be. We get that question on every webinar, and it's tough to say what a good enough score is going to be because you're being graded on a curve. So when we are working with potential offers on these, really what we're focused on is trying to get them as many points as possible, because obviously they're going to take the top scoring bidders and then make awards to those entities. Everybody must be registered in sam.gov. This is why they've released Amendment 1, actually, was so that if you were having issues with that, you needed to reach out to Polaris and let them know by a certain date that you were having issues with that, so that you could be kind of made exception for. But sam.gov is going to be the ground truth for where they verify your socioeconomic status, for where they look at your size status for 541512, and there's even your entity registration is getting pulled from there. So if that sam.gov record is not up to date, you're going to have issues with your bid. You've also got to be able to demonstrate fiscal responsibility. There's no pricing volume for Polaris, but you do have to be able to submit your company financials and show that you're a company in good standing. And you can be a joint venture or mentor protege if you are SBA approved. So if you are not already approved by the SBA, it's probably too late to pursue this route, just given the backlog of what that processing takes. Okay, so this is hopefully the thing that you dialed in for that's going to save you a little bit of a couple headaches as you go. So those JP6 forms, these are the project verification forms. These are required to be signed by your government customer or your prime if you're submitting subcontractor experience. If you have any deviation from what you're claiming on an FPDS record. So if you're trying to claim cybersecurity points, if you are trying to claim alignment to a different NICS code, if you're claiming emerging technology, you have to complete this JP6 form. And so some of the things that we saw come up over and over again would be, we would have a team and everybody would have their assigned NICS code and a project aligned to that NICS code, and they would send the forms out, and sometimes they would change those NICS codes. And so if you've played around with your scorecard at all on Polaris, you know that the best way to maximize your points is to cover as many NICS codes as possible, up to 5, right, with the highest value contracts. And so it can make a difference in your overall proposal score. If you are assigned to get a project covering 541512 and you get your project form signed for 541511, having duplicate NICS is permitted, but it's not advantageous. So just definitely make sure you sync with your teammates ahead of time on what everybody's assignment is and what the potential backups are, just in case the customer says, yeah, no, we awarded it in 541511, and that's where I want it to stay. We do recommend pre-filling out the information ahead of time, obviously, for your customers, and taking credit for any and all extra categories that you think might apply. So you will only be able to take credit for 2 cybersecurity projects, as an example. But if you have 4 projects that included cybersecurity services, it doesn't hurt to mark yes on the form and have your customer sign off on that, because you never know what project might fall out of contention, or what somebody might realize, like, hey, actually, we've got a different scoring project that gets us more points in this area. but it knocks out our cybersecurity points that we were counting on. It's just good to have those redundancies in the backup so that as you're playing Jenga with all of your projects, you give yourself some flexibility without having to go back to your government customers with multiple requests. We definitely recommend, if you are seeking realignment to different NICS codes, give your customer your substantiating documentation. Send that statement of work back to them or the PWS with the highlights that you have saying, look, we know that this is coded under 541, 512, but we clearly did disaster recovery services as part of these tasks. And then they can see for themselves in black and white what you're claiming. And then the part and parcel with this is making sure that your customer, your government customer, understands what you're not asking them to do. So in getting the government or your customer, if they were a commercial entity, to sign off on a different NICS code, we're not asking anybody to go back and change history, right? We don't want to say you assigned this in the wrong code. We're not trying to update any records. We're just saying that an element of the work that you performed aligned to a NICS code in a way that was integral to the project's success. So sometimes people get a little uncomfortable, especially if the contracting officers themselves haven't been tracking Polaris and don't understand why they're being asked to substantiate something. So just getting that conversation out of the way ahead of time where you say, look, we're not asking anybody to recode anything. We're just saying that the work, under this task area clearly also aligns to this NICS code, and we would just like you to validate that. So we're not asking them to assign any kind of dollar valuation to it. They don't have to say it was, X percentage of the contract. They just need to say, yes, you performed this work. It was integral to project success and it aligns to that NICS code. That's basically what the JP6 form is for. And then this is going to sound very simple, but make sure when you get the forms back from your customers that you sent them to, that they actually were signed. So some people are going to want to print them out and sign them with wet ink and scan them back to you, totally fine. Where we would see some issues were with the digital signatures. If they didn't save the form correctly, then they would just be sending back the form that you had sent them basically because the digital signature didn't save. So definitely open those forms up, make sure it was signed by the person you thought was going to sign it, and it's marked in the correct areas. Just save yourself a little bit of admin headache there. Okay, so with Symphony, this is again the portal that you are actually uploading your proposal to. So you're going to want to keep your file tags really simple and consistent. And as a best practice, if you are using projects from teammates, give them a little key of what tags you're using so that they can tag their documentation and you just review it. But you don't want to have, so I would recommend, for example, under the NICS code justification, you don't necessarily need to have a separate tag for every NICS code, or you don't need to have anything elaborate. It can be a one word, because all Symphony is doing is looking for a string of characters. So it can be anything you want. But again, the simpler you keep it, the more intuitive it's going to be, and the easier it's going to be to cross-check. The other thing that I would definitely recommend that you check is your spelling, because you can transpose letters very easily, especially if you're just doing a one-word tag. And so getting another set of eyes, I know I have this as the last bullet, but getting another set of eyes to make sure that everything's spelled correctly in your tags is really worth the additional effort here, just because it's going to make that validation process go a little bit quicker. Also keep your file names really simple and intuitive. So you will have to come up with a project name for each project that you're submitting. What I would recommend doing is every file that goes for that project should start with that project's name, and then is it the JP6? Is it the statement of work? Is it the award document? Because you're going to want to be able to view at a glance what you've uploaded and what you haven't uploaded. Related to that thought, I do recommend keeping a separate file tracker so that okay, for project number 1, I'm going to have 3 FPDS records because maybe I'm claiming points across 3 different areas. Maybe I need the start date and end date for the most recent modification and the total contract value from that one. But maybe the cost reimbursable tag for whatever reason is only on the first record. So just knowing which files you're supposed to have is going to help you when you're looking at Symphony to say, okay, did I upload everything I was supposed to? Does every project have either an FPDS? Well, so everything needs an FPDS record for sure. But if FPDS isn't available, do I have my JP6? Do I have my award document? Do I have my statement of work? Are there additional documents that I needed to upload to substantiate whatever claims I'm making? And then this will give you the cross-reference, but it's also really important, and hopefully what I'm about to say makes sense, but there's no dashboard difference when you're looking at Symphony after you take credit for something. If you've uploaded one file or if you've uploaded 5 files, it just shows as complete. So it can be a little bit of a, you might get a false sense of reassurance because you've checked something off and Symphony thinks you're done, but in fact, you're missing documents. So let me tell you about a couple areas where this applies. Under your GSA 527, as soon as you upload one document there and you certify the claim that everything is, correct and accurate, it's going to show as that form being completed. But as part of the GSA 527 submission area, you also need to include company financial statements. So Polaris isn't smart enough to say, yes, you should have 4 files here, and you have all 4 files. They're just going to say, yeah, well, you certified it and you uploaded something, so we think you're good to go. It's the same thing with subcontracting letters of commitment or your joint venture agreements. Whatever your admin documentation is, I'll call it, for substantiating your relationships with your teammates or your project verification. As long as you've got a tag in there on the project form and you've got something uploaded, Polaris is going to say, okay, you're good to go until proven otherwise. And so you may or may not actually be. So this is where a separate file tracker can really help you to make sure that you've gotten everything. Anybody that you think might need access to Symphony, you need to add them before the closing date of the solicitation. This is buried in the Q&A, but if you want people to be able to view the files, if you want them to be able to see what your submission was, you need to add them now. And they don't have to go in and actually, change anything. Nobody needs to be messing around with files or, inputting forms or changing fields. But if you want them to have access to what you've submitted for Polaris and to see any feedback that you get from GSA, add them to Symphony now. So something else we found, so Symphony will show you what your running score is as you're uploading documentation and adding projects and doing all that as part of your proposal. But you want to definitely double check each one of those fields, because if you copy and paste a NICS code or a contract value, we definitely saw some issues where that would not register in the system as a distinct entry, if that makes sense. So if you copied 5415112 and you had, you thought you had a different NICS code for each project, but you used copy and paste, you might only get credit for the ones that you actually typed in. It was a really weird little glitch, and they may have worked it out. But just in case, we do recommend typing in every field within that project submission form. And then, like I mentioned, every proposal can benefit from a second set of eyes. When you're going through and doing your final review before you submit, and you're looking at your project and it says, okay, where did you take credit for your value? The file that you have associated there should be something that makes sense. It should be an award document or it should be an FPDS record. If you're taking credit for your contract value in the statement of work, that's a little weird and it should be a red flag. Same thing with the past performance, right? Substantiating that you have satisfactory past performance on a project. If your tag is a statement of work and it's not a JP4, it's not a CPARS form, that should be an immediate, tip off that like, hey, wait a second, we might have flagged the wrong document. So just putting that out there. There are some not huge challenges, but there are some little nuances that you need to be aware of with Symphony. And we do recommend uploading things, as you go. But for each project, it's going to be more efficient if you wait until you have all of your documents that you need for that project, just so that you don't forget to go back and tag something or think you have something that you don't. Okay, so some miscellaneous lessons learned. When it comes to teaming, I know we already talked about this, but it bears repeating. Please stick to your assigned NICS codes and know what backups you have for your projects, because it might happen that you think you can get credit for a project and your customer is non-responsive because the contracting officer transferred 3 years ago and nobody knows you anymore. Or it could be that they just don't agree or they're not comfortable signing. So in those cases, you don't want to lose all credit, right? You would hopefully have another project that you could sub in. The reps and certs, this is an interesting one. So if you read closely what the solicitation says, you need to fill out the reps and certs from the solicitations, JP-1, but you also need to submit a copy of the annual reps and certs from sam.gov for everybody that's on your team. So you should have 2 reps and certs files going into Symphony. Same thing with subcontractor letter of commitment. Everybody that's on your team needs to give you permission and say, yes, we acknowledge we are committed for Polaris. You have permission to use our projects. If you're not using projects from your teammates, they still need to submit this letter of commitment that says, yes, we are aware and we give permission to be bid as part of this team. And then make sure you have your previous contract where you've demonstrated the relationship in the same manner that you're proposing. So if you are priming on Polaris and you have a teammate that used to be your prime, that's not the same relationship, and you will not get the points, the 5,000 points, for being able to establish that you've got a very low organizational risk assessment. So the details do matter here. One quick note while we're talking about teaming documents, and since we just talked about Symphony, it is permissible to combine all of your project documentation or all of your files for a certain section into one big PDF. I actually don't recommend doing that just because while it might seem simple to just have one document that you're referencing for your tags and for your projects, making sure that you have all of the line items becomes a lot more challenging if you are having to then open up the PDF and make sure that you have put your award document in there, because by the way, those could be 100 pages long, plus your statement of work, there's another 50 pages, plus your FPDS records. And those are usually, just a couple pages each, but did you have the original one? Did you have the most recent one? Like all of a sudden you're needing a checklist within your document to make sure that you have everything. So I would just recommend keeping the files separate and naming them in a very simple and intuitive way so that you can do a much quicker cross-reference between what you were tracking you needed to upload and what actually got uploaded to Symphony. Because by the way, if you have a file size that exceeds what the permissible limit is, it won't upload. It'll just keep recycling the screen. So you should be able to see, you'll get the notice as you upload files. It'll say file successfully uploaded. If you don't see that notice, your file might be too big and you might need to go back and compress your PDF. Because like we said, these are contract documents that can get pretty large and unwieldy. Okay, so for the GSA Form 527, this is the financial information for the companies. So read the directions very closely. They did a good job in the solicitation of articulating exactly what you do and do not need to fill out. And there are a lot of fields that are not required. You don't have to list your largest projects, but they do want separate files for the previous 2 years worth of income statements and the interim statement for the current year. So there's just some gotchas there. For the professional compensation plan, make sure you actually have salary ranges for all of the LCATs in attachment J2. This is about 2.5 pages worth of LCATs. So if you don't have those salary ranges, you're not submitting a professional compensation plan that meets the solicitation requirements. So it's worth the time to sit down and again, get another set of eyes before you upload this and make sure you've included all the information that you need to. And then just, again, motherhood and apple pie here, but stovepipes can happen even within small businesses. So the evidence that they list for the project verification, that's not a pick and choose menu. So as soon as you deviate from claiming anything that's already inherent on the FPDS, you have to include a JP6, the award documentation, and the statement of work or PWS, and possibly some additional information if those documents don't cover what you're trying to claim. So it's not a, hey, well, we got the JP6 and here's our statement of work, so we're covered. No, you have to have that contract award document as well. And sometimes those are housed in a different, library or file storage under someone's purview in a small business. Maybe it's with contracts or maybe it's with a past performance lead. Wherever it might be, there's going to be some coordination that needs to happen across companies to make sure that you get all of the documentation that you need. So it's worth it to brief anybody who might be providing documentation to you as part of your own company about why you're asking for what you're asking for and what meets the criteria as being satisfying qualifying evidence. Okay, so couple things to recap here. There are still some big gotchas when it comes to strategy that we want you to watch out for. So for example, forming too big or complex of a team. If you can't demonstrate that you've got that pre-existing relationship with everybody on your team, you're going to open yourself up to a 5,000 point penalty. And that's huge on this scorecard. And then again, keep in mind that everybody who's on the team needs to meet some baseline requirements, right? Everybody needs to be a small business in 541512. Everybody has to do their reps and certs. Everybody has to have an updated sam.gov profile. Those are all showstoppers. If you don't, dot your I's and cross your T's. Again, we just talked a lot about documentation. Make sure you include everything that you're required to include for the projects that you're submitting. And by the way, what we ran into a lot was there would be discrepancies. Something, maybe FPDS doesn't reflect the most common, the most recent amendment or modification that raised the ceiling value. Or maybe what you realize is that you've got a prime contract where instead of funding the task orders, incrementally, they've actually issued a new task order every single time. You can't aggregate task orders. So looking at your documentation, understanding what it says in the context of Polaris definitions, which they describe for projects and that substantiated documentation in great detail in the statement of work. And there's a ton of information in the Q&A about really particular situations. If you haven't reviewed all of that and figured out what the ground truth is for your documentation, then you're a little bit behind. So just keep in mind, because we did see this too, where sometimes a customer would change a value on the JP6 form because they'd say, oh, no, we think the contract value is this. You will get credit for what you can prove. So, excuse me, the JP6 form is not evidence in and of itself. You're still going to have to submit an FPDS record or contract award documentation or something that says, here's the ground truth, an official document for the total award value or for the end of the contract to show it's ongoing. That JP6 form is not the end all be all, even though it is signed by a contracting officer. Okay, so you'd also just don't want to, probably most of you have already sent out forms, which is great. But hopefully you took a breath or a beat before you did that to make sure that you understood what you were asking people to sign and that it was aligned to the correct NICS codes. And again, we just recommend if you think that you can get points for cybersecurity, even if you don't end up claiming the points, get the validation that you did the cybersecurity work so that if you need the points, they're there. And then don't rush into these teaming or JV mentor-protege relationships. The cases where a joint venture makes sense from a scoring perspective is if you've worked together previously, you both have projects that are qualifying and are going to move your score, right? Move the needle on your score. And if both of you, between the two entities or three entities or whoever's in the joint venture, if there are the optional certifications and clearances from volume 4. So maybe one entity has the top secret clearance and the other has the approved purchasing system. That might be a case where it makes sense to form, this JV, because for anything in just the prime sub relationship, if you're the prime and you just got regular teammates, only the certifications in the name of the prime offer are going to count. The nice thing about the joint venture, the mentor protege, is that you get a little bit more flexibility in where you can take credit for those certifications. But again, do your homework, make sure you have an existing relationship, because getting 750 points for CMMI is not going to outweigh the 5,000 point penalty if you haven't worked together before and can't demonstrate that. Okay, so as we're moving, I know we're going a little bit quickly, but wanted to get into some frequently asked questions. And these have been edited. So these are on the GSA community interact page. But again, there's some good information here. So can you win in multiple pools? Yes, you can. But you can only get one award per pool. So if you submitted under women-owned small business, you submitted under small business, if you're successful and you get an award there, that does not preclude you from getting an award in service disabled or HUBZone if you qualify for those categories. But again, hopefully you didn't use, your projects can only get used once per pool, and you can only get one award per pool. So this next one's kind of interesting, right? If the offer does not bid on the small business pool, but let's say they do bid on service disabled veteran-owned small business pool and they win, will that bidder then be able to see anything released in the small business pool? And the answer is no. So if you remember way back from, when this thing was still in draft, the ordering contracting officer is going to have the discretion as to where the task orders ultimately get competed under Polaris. So this is why they want you to assign a dedicated resource that can go out and help drive business to this Polaris contract vehicle if you're successful. Because it's not just going to be a free for all. If you don't automatically qualify for everything in the small business pool, if you're a woman-owned small business, or if you're a HUBZone, or if you're a service disabled veteran-owned small business, you're only going to be able to bid on the task orders in the pool where you have an award. Okay, so can you reuse the forms? Like so far, yes, they haven't changed anything of material consequence in the JP6 or the JP4. So if you've uploaded all that documentation, you should be able to pull those projects in and associate them with your proposals for one of the two pools that's open now. And just as a quick recap, these numbers have not changed. They're still anticipating 60 awards in HUBZone and 70 awards in the service disabled veteran-owned small business pool. And another variation on a theme here, can you reuse the primary relevant experience projects? Yes, but again, just make sure you're not using your projects twice in one pool. And then what happens if you lose your small business set aside status, in the course of this what's expected to be a 10-year contract? The short answer is you're going to have to re-represent prior to the 6th year if you want to stay in the pool. So if you lose that status, you will be off-ramped or if you're expected to be off-ramped from the pools that you might have originally qualified for. They have said all along, they being GSA, that they do intend to have future on-ramps. They haven't published any kind of schedule for that, but it might be that you don't qualify in one pool, or maybe there's going to be room made in the small business pool for other small businesses as we go here. We would definitely expect for that to happen. Especially just looking at the scorecard and the criteria, because we know that there's probably going to be a lot of what I'll affectionately call chubby smalls who get the top scores. So at a certain point, those businesses will likely graduate and move on. And then that'll create room for additional companies to be on-ramped onto Polaris. Okay, so that was a lot of information. If you have additional questions, you can certainly reach out and contact us. We've got a great place on our website where we're uploading our webinars. We have our Polaris blogs. If you have questions and you just want to have a chat about your company and your position, if you want to augment and have another set of eyes and do a compliance check for you prior to submission, we can help with all of those things. Reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. We've got a YouTube channel. Like I said, we're posting on LinkedIn. We're here to help, and we would love to work with you. So thank you so much for your time today, and good luck.